People converting to Islam should be shown this clip. But Muslims should know about this. They should know that the very core of Sunni Islam has major theological problems. The primary source of Islam is the Quran and Sunnah. Everyone knew for years that Hadith was bad, like really bad, but they didn't realize that this applies to Quran as well. Yasir Qadi is no stranger to controversy. Being the academic he is, he sometimes ruffles feathers with comments he has made about different issues. But this time, it was even worse than before. He said something that shook the ground below the Dawah community. The Muslim community had to go on damage control after this, so much so that Mohammed Hijab took the drastic step of deleting the last 30 minutes of his interview he did with Yasir Qadi. I'm going to tell you what happened and how it got there. I'm going to share with you what happened in 2020 and how the holes in the Quran narrative got started. I'm your friendly ex-Muslim, Abdullah Samir. I'm exploring the topic of Islam and how it affects the lives of believers and disbelievers. Welcome to my channel if you're new here. Yasir had established rapport with Mohammed Hijab. Mohammed was giving him the chance to air some difficult questions and tackle them on his established platform. This gave Yasir Qadi a safe space, supposedly, to discuss with someone friendly on his side while quashing the rumors about his doubts that were going around that everyone seemed to keep talking about. It was a smart move, or so he thought. Thing is, Hijab and Qadi underestimated how not ready the community was for this.
So one of the brothers, he did something, again, unethical. He was expelled from the list, and the list was basically banned because of that, stopped because of that. He couldn't refute to my argument, so he sent it to one of your madkhalis in England. And so then, of course, this madkhali gave it to the other one, and so obviously, everything, all whatever broke loose. But again, this was not something I brought up in public, and I would never bring it up in public. And I don't think it is wise to bring it up in public.
So what he's saying here is that there was a private scholarly discussion list that Yasir Qadi was on, where he was speaking about the problems he's seen with Quran preservation. I actually have some of those emails. Guess who leaked them? Fareed. Fareed leaked these to Dawah Man to expose Yasir Qadi. But instead, this moron ended up creating the biggest scandal on the internet for Islam. In this email, Yasir Qadi stated the Quran is not letter for letter, dot for dot preserved. He said, how can we understand the Quran as being Kalamullah, meaning the speech of Allah, when clearly there are some human aspects to it? He comes up with proposals, one of them being that we assume that the recitations of the Quran, none of them are divine. Now, this is actually shocking because currently, all the recitations are considered equally divine, equally revelation. He then says that a failure to do so, meaning to deal with these problems, will lead to major problems amongst an ever-growing group of intellectually curious Muslims for whom the standard medieval narrative simply holds little academic weight. I believe I've mentioned this on the list before. I personally am aware of around a dozen Muslims in academia who have major crises of faith and perhaps one who has left the faith because of this issue. And I also have confessed on this list that my own personal crisis of knowledge, I wouldn't call it a faith crisis, although perhaps it came close, was when I entered into this realm during my first year at Yale and felt my world come crashing down in front of me. I didn't know what to believe about the hifth, meaning preservation, of the Quran anymore, because there was no alternative. You either had non-Muslim views or these simplistic, standardized, triumphalistic claims that a rational mind simply cannot acknowledge as true. Like, just wow. Imagine finding out after all these years that you have been taught a lie, taught an oversimplified false dogma, and now you're struggling to maintain your faith, almost falling into a crisis. And then sharing this privately with scholarly-like people just for it to be exposed to the masses.
Every single student of knowledge knows, who studies Ulum al-Quran, that the most difficult topics are Ahruf al-Qira'at. and the concept of ahruf and the reality of ahruf and the relationship of the Uthmanic Mus'haf with the ahruf and the preservation of the ahruf. Is it 1? Is it 3? Is it 7? And the relationship of the qira'at to the ahruf. This is a topic that when you're the beginning student of knowledge, you're like, what is all of this going on here? When you go a little bit more, you learn to simply memorize what your teachers say and regurgitate it out. And you don't fully comprehend. When you do a deep dive is when things get very, very awkward and difficult.
Very awkward and difficult the more you look into it. It even goes back to the time of the Sahaba, the companions, where the companion of Muhammad, Ubay, had a doubt.
And this isn't new. This is from the time of the Sahaba. In the Sahih or the Hasan hadith of Ubay bin Ka'b, the hadith of the ahruf, that when the Prophet ﷺ mentioned the issue of ahruf, and that there are different ahruf and whatnot, this is in the version of Muslim Imam Ahmad, Ubay bin Ka'b says, authentic hadith, فَدَخَلَ فِي نَفْسِي شَكٍّ. In my heart, a doubt came that I hadn't had about Islam since the days of Jahiliyyah. This is not a joke, brothers and sisters. The issue of ahruf and qira'at caused confusion to somebody whom the Prophet ﷺ said, if you want to listen to the Quran directly, listen to Ubay. Ubay is not some even average Sahabi. He is the Qari of the Quran. He is the master. He is who he is. And he goes, فَدَخَلْ فِي نَفْسِي شَكٍّ. Like, what is all of this stuff? And the Prophet put his hand, and then he goes, it all went away.
I love that the Sahaba, the companion of Muhammad, had a doubt. You know what? That's a good thing. But the solution wasn't a discussion. But Muhammad put his hand on his heart and it all went away. Imagine if life was so simple like that. Yeah, don't worry about the contradictions and problems. Just, let the Prophet put his hand on your heart and it's all gone. Like, 1400 years later, we look at him and we're like, yeah, okay, sure.
Now, for the first time, I'm telling you here, what was the crisis? I mentioned it, referenced it, but I never explicitly said it. Why didn't I say it? Because it should not be said in public. But unfortunately, these brothers, because they released the emails, so then I have to then get it. This was the issue. That the issue of ahruf and preservation and qira'at and relationships between them, these are very, very difficult issues. And the most advanced of our scholars, they're not quite fully certain how to solve all of the unanswered questions in there.
The issue of ahruf and preservation and qira'at are very difficult issues, and even the most advanced scholars are not fully certain how to solve all the unanswered questions. This little clip is enough to show you that Islam has major issues in its foundations, and that unfortunately the masses are not told about them. But then there's even more. We're not done yet. Qadi admits that this is a well-known problem among scholars. Well-known secret among academics, he says. The story of the emperor with no clothes is a story of an emperor who was sold the most amazing invisible clothes. The most beautiful clothes, he was told, is so beautiful. But the most obvious thing people realize is he was just naked and he got scammed. Here he was walking around and nobody wanted to tell him, you're just naked. And that's what he's saying Islam is like right now. They're all walking around thinking the Quran is preserved, but it's not. Just like the emperor with no clothes.
And by the way, this is now a well-known open secret amongst many Muslim graduate students and academics around the world. And this is well known. Traditional understandings of ahruf and qira'at cannot answer some of these pressing questions that are now being poked by our people by our academics, by their academics outside of the faith tradition. You see, in a Muslim environment, there's always some respect that we have for the Quran. We should. In a Muslim environment, we'll press a little bit and then we'll say, okay, khalas, sami'na wa ata'na. And that's great, alhamdulillah. When you go to academia, they don't have that red line. And they're going to just, the famous story of the emperor with no clothes. They're going to just point out, no, that doesn't make any sense. Well, that's not true, and this and that. And they'll bring issues, which I'm not going to mention explicitly, that are true because they're in your own books. They're not inventing anything new. They'll bring you riwayat, and they'll bring you athar, and then you add to that very well-known issues of, I don't even want to be explicit. And then you bring on top of that makhtutat, and then. And it's very clear to you and to every single very advanced student and specialist, that the standard narrative has holes in it. That's what I'm going to say. The standard narrative does not answer some very pressing questions. Okay? This is what I'm going to say.
Another bombshell in this little interview is he said, Alhamdulillah, we poke a little and then we stop. He's saying it's good to be a little skeptical but not actually follow the evidence where it leads. Why not? Because it'll take you out of Islam? Because it'll destroy the narrative of the Quran being fully preserved? This is where the Muslim community is. They're in the dark. They have to be dragged out of the false ideas they have, just like Plato's cave. We have to show them the light. And then the final bombshell of a question. Mohammed Hijab thought he was going to save the day with this question. He thought, okay, this is kind of like uncomfortable. You can see in the look on his eyes. He looks like a terrified deer in the headlights. And he thought, okay, I'm gonna solve this whole thing with this question. What's the question? What if I gave you a blank mushaf, meaning a Quran with no words? Can you write down with no human interference what was revealed from Allah? If you do, would it correspond to the existing Quran we have? Yasir Qadhi didn't want to answer this question. He interrupted him and he pushed back. In fact, he got so irritated at the repeated questioning and said, "You're pushing me and I don't want to talk about this."
Ask you one question to try and make this as specific as possible. I think if I were to give you a blank mushaf, yeah, and tell you to write what is munazzal verbatim from Allah into that mushaf with no human interference, would you write something which corresponds?
It's not an easy answer. It's not an easy yes or no. It is enough for the Muslim to believe that the
I think
Quran
this should be an easy yes or no, though. Yes, Khadi. I have to.
Okay, very, very well. So, yeah, Muhammad, after we get off this phone call, me and you, let's have a number of discussions. No problem. I'm very open with advanced students. But these issues should not... Look, it is Kalamullah, what is going to be written. It is Kalamullah. It is
what would you write?
You're pushing me. And I'm saying it's not hikmah to... Listen, I have a condition. Like I said, everything I say is going to be factual. If I wanted to do tawdiyah and whatnot, I would do it right now in front of you. There is no need for tawdiyah. The Quran is the uncreated speech of Allah. The Quran is preserved. The Quran is known. The Quran is mutawatir. And alhamdulillah, all of the qira'at are the Quran. All of the qira'at are authentic. Alhamdulillah. Leave it at that, ya akhi. Beyond this, honestly, I have no problem. We'll have discussions or take my class. But beyond this requires background information. It is enough for the Muslim to know that the Quran is the speech of Allah that has been protected, and what we recite is the kalam of Allah. That is enough for the Muslim to know.
I appreciate what you're saying, but
you have it. This is the reality of the situation. And don't blame or thank Yasir Qadhi. This is a group effort. Fareed, Dawaman, Mohammed Hijab, and all of them were involved in this production. And funny thing is, all of them have been involved with me too. Other than Yasir Qadhi, who didn't want to admit that he was triggered by my video I made about his doubts. But what we've been doing, raising light on these issues, us ex-Muslims, has kind of forced them into a corner. And so you can see the power of YouTube, the power of the internet, the power of ex-Muslims speaking out. And what did we learn? The Quran is the speech of Allah. It's preserved because it says it's preserved, so it must be alhamdulillah. End of story. Stop asking questions, or ask a bit of questions, but don't ask too many. Of course, after this interview, there was damage control needed. We're not done. Hijab decided to do something that actually surprised me. He distanced himself from what Yasir Qadhi said, of course, by deleting 30 minutes of the interview, sure. And of course, even worse than that, he issued a statement that included, if Dr. Qadhi holds an opinion that opposes the ijma consensus of the ummah or makes anti-normative claims, he will be refuted. Can you imagine talking about a scholar like that? You can see the community is divided. They're not ready for the truth. They'd rather be like the emperor with no clothes, walking around thinking the Quran has been preserved. But the variants, the hadith, the manuscripts, they all tell us a different story, that it isn't. It seems like if you want to sell Islam, you have to hide all of these defects. Selling a used car would be easier than selling a Quran full of holes in it. The Quran hasn't been preserved like they say it is. The process of preservation has been a very human one, just like Hadith. Everything in this religion is very human. It's just that most Muslims aren't aware of it, and the scholars hide this from the masses. You see, religion really is a tool used to control people. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more, do subscribe and consider supporting me on Patreon. Your support is most appreciated. This is your friendly ex-Muslim Abdullah Samir, signing out.